Gotta admit, I almost got the RHA CL750 wrong. Pretty wrong, actually. Because my contact already told me when I requested them that they are quite unique and very different to my favorites, the MA750, which I, by the way, had the wireless version of. But even though that wasn't the best sign, I still wanted to know for myself. So about 3 months ago, I finally got them. And yes, there is a reason why it took me so long to actually get to this review. Because my very first impression was, yes, now I know what different means. Because they have a lot of highs, and I've seen that already on the frequency response. But I just didn't expect them to be that extreme and a little bit on the harsher side. Therefore, I tried them over the next few weeks again and again and again, but I could never really get warm with them. And when I actually made my notes though for the review, I noticed one thing. I really like the soundstage, I really like the imaging, the qualities of the bass, mids and highs, besides them being a little bit too much, and the sound signature in general was exactly what I usually want. And that's when I decided to do something that I usually try to avoid as much as possible at all costs, using an EQ. So I used the 5-band equalizer on my player and made only 2 changes, which turned then this headphone from almost unbearable to actually pretty great. But more about that a little bit later. Let's check what's in the box and get to the case first. This is the CL750 case where, for example, the T20 comes with a little bit of a different one. I'm not going to fully open it because for some reason all the tips are still in small little plastic bags instead of like the T20 already here applied on this, which is still something that you get. And I've talked about that in my MA750 review. They have a little bit of a different comfort and also a little bit of an impact on the sound. But I've actually, for the end of the review, not used either of these because for some reason on the CL750 I didn't get a proper secure fit with them, so I just took pretty cheap ones from KZ Tips, and these for some reason work better for me. Now about the cable, I have to say I really like that one a lot because it doesn't just look pretty stylish, but it also feels very high quality, also a little bit flexible. The connector is high quality, looks also nice, so everything has been done really good in this aspect. Like you can see, you can also adjust the length of the split, even though there is one thing that I would have liked to have seen maybe different, which would have been a non-fixed cable, because if that's broken, you are a little bit out of luck. Obviously, you might be still in your warranty time, but that's a little bit maybe of a possible downside. Then the next thing is hooks. Not everyone likes them, you just have to know it for yourself, even though here's already a difference. Here is just the silicone part where they sit around your ear, where for example the T20 have a patented thing where this part is flexible, so you can adjust them maybe to get a little bit more of a secure fit, which you will actually get. So let me actually take them and put them in my ear so you can see how they look. And I definitely like the metal feel of them. They look very high quality, feel very high quality. Unfortunately though, the metal here isn't magnetic like on the MA750, but that's not a big thing. They look quite subtle, but for me the main issue is that besides maybe with the foam tips, which kind of fix the issue, I still don't get the most secure fit. It is a good enough fit now with the other tips, but I don't just really like the foam so much. Depends on you. But the comfort is actually pretty good, because if you like the hooks, they are pretty, I would say, subtle, because you don't notice them so much, but you can't really adjust them. But then once you get them right with the proper tips, very comfortable and secure. Isolation, I would say, is actually pretty good if you have a good seal. Then it blocks out mostly the mids and the highs. The mids and the bass. Highs still get a little bit through, but that's not big of an issue. What might be an issue, especially for the portable guys out there, is how easy they are to drive. Because I would say on a phone, it's pretty much impossible. These need a lot of power. For example, I have here also the iFi Audio X-Can. That one is able to drive them actually pretty easy, but I had to turn it up already quite a lot. So for example, the T20, way easier to push. So on a phone, just forget them. You need something more high quality. That's just how it is. Now let's get to the soundstage and imaging, and what I like here is that they sound noticeably more airy and open than most closed back earphones. It's also wider than average, which is one thing I like, and I also like the pretty nice imaging because it is very well laid out. We get a good separation between the vocals and the instruments, which come more from the sides, and the voices actually come pretty straightforward in the center to you, so that's definitely something that I like. But when it comes to the sound signature, like I already said, the highs are a little bit of an issue, but before that, I have to say they are pretty bright, especially towards the upper end, a little bit overshadowing out of the box for the rest of the music. But other than that, the bass I would have to actually say is quite neutral, very well integrated into the rest of the sound, but it also sounds, at least the mids, also a little bit more clinical. Not really analytical, but more on the clinical side. They are not super intimate, instruments sound a little bit more distant, but therefore the voices come out really nice. But I would also say out of the box it is definitely less relaxing because it's more demanding, so maybe not all that great for long-term use. About the bass, actually pretty good low sub bass because it went down really good and it had still enough power. The mid bass was a little bit weaker, but it's a pretty much of an inconspicuous bass. Like I said, it integrates very well. It is ever so slightly warm, but it has a really nice presence and it does an actually surprisingly good job, which you wouldn't expect at first when you listen to them at the first moment because the highs are so present. Because I would have to say it makes a pretty great background job. It is always there when you need it with the right quality, but it doesn't try to be the main character here, which is something that I actually prefer when it comes to bass. So it's a pretty tight and actually impactful bass with the right music, and the bass itself is actually pretty great. Now the mids, vocals are ever so slightly pushed forward, which is something that I like. In some certain situations, at least not EQ'd, I'll get to that in a second. It sounds maybe a little bit thin because there are just so much highs, but that's that. About the highs, like I said, by default, quite boosted. Also a little bit on the thinners, not thinner side, but on the more sibilant side, and definitely quite harsh. So not relaxing, definitely that, and there's pretty much no roll-off. They have a pretty wide extension. But for what kind of music do they work right now? So I would say this. For metal, once again, out of the box, they were a little bit too harsh and they sound a little bit too thin. A little bit also come away to analytical, clinical. I didn't, like that so much. But this will all change once we get to the EQing. Pop was absolutely okay. What I really liked, actually, for some reason that surprised me a lot, was bass-heavy music. Because, like I said, the bass is really good. And if you listen to bass-heavy music that doesn't really incorporate all the many highs, you might actually like this a lot. I mean, it's not a lot of bass because, like I said, that it's not its premise. But the bass quality is really good, very detailed and great resolution and so on. But what it works out of the box really good is ballads, especially where the bass and the highs aren't all that much of a factor and the mids come in where this one shines. And classic works also good, maybe not quite that much for orchestras because the oomphy, powerful bass is missing a little bit. So let's talk about the competition. There are obviously the RHA C750, which have a few upsides. They are, for example, out of the box the better all-rounder. They might have a little bit more of a secure fit, maybe also the comfort might come down to you, but they have a little bit of a glare, which I don't like so much. That was always something that was a little bit off-putting for me, like the upper mids and the lower highs on the T20. That was a little bit odd, but usually people liked it a lot. But if you would ask me which one would you prefer, so me with EQing, I think I would actually go for the CL750 for the fact that they just push the vocals a little bit more, which is something that I like, so they are more vocal dominant. But again, the T20 are way easier to power, they are way more streamlined and still on a super high level, so most people I guess would still prefer these. Then there are the MA750, which I can only judge based on the wireless version, which I still think is one of my favorites of all time because it has the exact sound signature that I like with the qualities. I mean, specific qualities aren't as good as here, but the overall tonal balance and the qualities are so good that it is still my favorite, and it's actually a little bit cheaper. Then, for example, I have also reviewed the Brainwaves B200 and the B400, but none of these can really compete with these. So let's get into EQing. So what I did is I just took the last two bands of my equalizer and pushed them to -2, and this earphone was pretty much fixed. It did exactly what I needed to do, which means that this headphone actually responds very well to EQing, which is a big plus. So then the sibilance was almost gone. It's still obviously there, but it was way less noticeable. And just too much of highs were gone. And then you could fully focus onto the really great mids along with that bass that integrates so well. And everything felt so much nicer now because it's now a bright and kind of uplifting sound. And especially if you have lower quality music from the older times, everything feels way more fresh now. And it was way more pleasant to listen to. It's still a pretty bright and I wouldn't say really cold, but definitely not a super warm or a very sounded headphone. It's still more on the neutral side. But if you like very fresh listening music, like something that is more uplifting, but definitely has no darkness inside, but you like all the details in the highs, because the highs have so many details and unless it's not too much, which is something that I guess actually most people wouldn't prefer, because from what I got in my experience, people tend towards more of a little bit rolled off highs, because no one like me likes them that much. So I'm actually one of those who says a little bit too much is actually what I prefer over a little bit too less, but that just comes down to you. So let's get into the pros and cons real quick. Really like the top build quality, pretty sweet for ballads. That's where it kind of shines, and also classical music. They are very detailed, they are great for treble freaks for sure, and they respond specifically well for EQing, which they need, but then it works great. Now about the cons: fixed cable, they are hard to power. Comfort is good, but the fit could have been a little bit better. Overemphasized treble out of the box, not really an all-rounder out of the box, and they can be a little bit fatiguing. But this is always what I'm saying, that it comes down to the quality of the driver. Because so many times people told me, yeah, you could EQ it and all that and this and that. Yeah, you can. But you can't EQ a bad headphone into a good one. You can make the sound signature better, but the qualities, if they aren't there, you can't fix them. Here, for example, you have the other side. You have something that needs EQing, but the qualities are there. So if you adjust it to the tonal response that you want, the quality is absolutely delivered. And then this is actually, like I said, pretty great headphone. Headphone. And I actually like it a lot. Price of around $110 as I've seen, like 130 euros. I have to actually say, at first I did not expect to like them at all, because like I said, first impression and so on. But this little EQing actually changed so much that this one is pretty great. Pretty nice. And that's where I'm gonna leave it. I hope you liked it. Until next time, bye.